Jasmine's heart stopped as she glimpsed Kenneth through the open door. He stood before the mirror, the towel hanging low, exposing his large cucumber. Her breath caught, eyes wide, face flushed with heat. She stepped back quickly, but the image of him, raw and unguarded, was burned into her mind, pulling her in like a magnet. Hey there! If this is your first time here, welcome. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. Share it with your friends and family so they don't miss out. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Jasmine sat by the window, staring out at the sprawling estate that had once been the heart of her family's empire. The grand mansion, surrounded by lush gardens and towering oak trees, felt like a ghost of its former self. Where there had once been laughter and life, there was now only silence. The grand house no longer symbolized success. It was a reminder of her family's crumbling legacy. Her father had worked hard to build their wealth, but years of poor decisions and risky investments had drained everything away. The business was faltering, and the once thriving empire her family had built was now teetering on the edge of collapse. Jasmine's mother, though always dressed in her usual elegance, wore the strain of the situation in her eyes. It was clear that the family's situation was growing dire, and nothing Jasmine did seemed to stop the downward spiral. In the midst of this crisis, Paul entered her life. He was everything her parents had hoped for, wealthy, powerful, and successful. He was a businessman with a reputation for turning failing companies around, a man who seemed to have it all figured out. He was also charming, attentive, and generous, showering Jasmine with lavish gifts and taking her on extravagant vacations. To an outsider, it seemed like a fairy tale romance, a perfect match made in heaven. And yet, as Jasmine stood at the threshold of the marriage her family desperately needed, her heart felt heavy. She knew what was expected of her. This was the only way to secure her family's future, to ensure they wouldn't lose everything. She had been taught to think beyond her own desires, to put the family's well-being first. Paul was kind, and in many ways, he was everything she could ask for. But as their relationship grew, Jasmine realized that what he offered was not what she longed for. The gifts, the luxury, the attention, it all felt like a distraction from the emptiness that lingered inside her. Despite the growing bond between them, there was something missing. Every time they spent time together, she felt the void between them widening. Paul's attentiveness was comforting, but it didn't reach the deeper parts of her soul. He was a good man, but he lacked the passion, the fire, the intimacy that Jasmine secretly craved. She had tried to tell herself it didn't matter. Perhaps, with time, she would learn to love him the way he loved her. Perhaps, with time, the distance between them would fade. But deep down, she knew the truth. No matter how hard she tried to convince herself, she couldn't ignore the yearning for something more. The feeling that she was giving up a piece of herself for the sake of her family's survival. The day of the wedding arrived, and Jasmine stood before the altar, dressed in a gown that sparkled under the church lights. It was everything she had imagined, everything her parents had hoped for. But as Paul took her hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through her fingers. This wasn't the love she had dreamed of. This wasn't the passion she had imagined. It was a sacrifice. A sacrifice for her family, for her parents who had done so much for her. And though she was filled with a sense of duty, a sense of responsibility, there was also a quiet sadness, a resignation to a life she hadn't chosen. Paul kissed her softly on the lips, and the crowd cheered, their smiles wide and bright. Jasmine smiled too, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She hoped, in time, that she would learn to love him the way he loved her. She hoped that the void inside her would be filled with the love of her new husband. But for now, she had to accept the life that had been laid before her. Jasmine had hoped that things would change once they were married. She had told herself that with time, she would grow closer to Paul, that love and intimacy would develop as they settled into their new life. After all, he was kind, attentive, and generous. He gave her everything she could ever need, luxury, security, and comfort. The lavish home, the exotic vacations, the jewelry, it was all more than she could have ever dreamed of. But something was still missing. Paul treated her with love and respect. He cared for her deeply and did his best to make her happy. They went out to fine restaurants, attended glamorous events, and spent their evenings together in their beautiful home. And yet, every time they were alone together, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that there was an emptiness she couldn't ignore. Their intimacy, or lack of it, weighed heavily on her heart. Every night when they shared a bed, Jasmine tried to convince herself that it would get better. She told herself that this was something all couples went through, that the passion would come with time. But it never did. When Paul touched her, it was gentle, careful, even loving. But there was no spark, no connection. He wasn't selfish. He never ignored her needs or desires. But he was distant, almost like he wasn't truly there with her. Their physical closeness felt more like an obligation than a shared experience. Afterward, he would retreat into his own world, silently slipping into sleep as if the moment had never happened. Jasmine lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the loneliness pressing down on her. She had never imagined this would be her reality. She had expected more than just kindness from Paul. She had wanted to feel the deep connection she had always dreamed of, a bond that went beyond the surface. Instead, she felt more distant from him than ever. She started to wonder if it was her fault. Maybe she wasn't doing something right. Maybe she wasn't being the kind of wife Paul needed. But deep down, she knew it wasn't her fault. Paul was a good man, but something was missing, something she couldn't put into words. Days turned into weeks, and Jasmine found herself growing restless. During the day, she could go about her usual activities. She spent time with friends, went to the gym, and kept up with the social calendar. But when night came, she would find herself dreading the quiet that filled the house. When Paul's work kept him late, the silence felt suffocating. Jasmine couldn't fill the void, no matter how much she tried to distract herself. But she didn't know how to bring it up to Paul. He was so kind, so gentle. She didn't want to hurt him, didn't want to make him feel inadequate. The thought of discussing her desires with him seemed impossible. What if he didn't understand? What if he took it the wrong way? For the first time since the wedding, Jasmine wondered if the sacrifices she had made were worth it. Jasmine had tried her best to push the image of Kenneth from her mind, but it was impossible. It wasn't just the way he moved or how he carried himself with quiet confidence. It was that one moment, when she had accidentally seen him naked. It had been a hot afternoon. The house was unusually quiet, and with Paul away on another business trip, Jasmine had taken a walk in the garden to clear her mind. She had wandered by the staff quarters, and there was a slight rustling behind the door. Curious, she stepped closer, not thinking much of it. That was when she saw him. Kenneth had been standing in front of a small mirror, adjusting his towel, but what caught Jasmine's attention was his big manhood before he turned around. His back was exposed, and the towel draped loosely around his waist hung just low enough for her to glimpse his bare skin. For a moment, time seemed to slow as she looked at him. He was unaware of her presence, and she couldn't help but stare. There was something raw and real about him, so different from the polished, controlled world she had grown up in. His body, strong and defined, moved with ease as he adjusted his shirt, and Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. But just as quickly as it happened, she snapped out of it. Her face flushed with heat, and she took a step back, retreating quickly before he noticed her. The guilt washed over her almost immediately, but as she walked away, the image of him lingered in her mind, pressing into her thoughts like a force she couldn't ignore. That night, as she tried to fall asleep, it was impossible to shake the memory. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of Kenneth's big manhood seemed to play in her mind, making her heart race in a way she couldn't explain. She rolled over in bed, her thoughts racing. She knew she should forget it. It was just a brief, accidental encounter. But she couldn't stop herself from thinking about him, about the way he seemed so unaffected by the world around him, so comfortable in his own skin. Days passed, but the attraction only grew stronger. Jasmine tried to stay focused on her routine. But with each passing day, she found herself stealing glances at Kenneth, noticing the quiet way he moved through his tasks. He was always respectful, always doing his job well, but there was a certain ease about him that kept drawing her in. She hadn't felt this drawn to anyone in a long time, and it unsettled her. One evening, after finishing dinner alone, Jasmine found herself restless. The house was silent, and she felt more alone than ever. The longing she had tried to ignore for so long flared up again. The temptation to be near Kenneth, to talk to him, to feel his presence, was too much to resist. Without thinking, she picked up the phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed his number. "Hello." Kenneth answered, his voice calm and steady as always. "Hi, Kenneth. It's Jasmine," she said, her voice shaking slightly. I'm having dinner, and it's just a quiet night. Would you like to join me for a drink? Maybe just one glass of wine. I'm alone." There was a brief pause, and Jasmine's heart skipped a beat as she waited for him to respond. The air between them seemed to thicken with anticipation. "I'd be happy to, Miss Jasmine," Kenneth replied, a hint of warmth in his voice. "I'll be over in a moment." She hung up the phone, her mind racing. What had she just done? She had invited him to her private space, to share a quiet moment together. She tried to calm her nerves, but she knew there was no turning back now. When Kenneth arrived, she greeted him with a soft smile, trying to hide her unease. "Thanks for coming," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "No problem at all," he replied, his voice soothing. He took a seat at the table, and Jasmine poured them both a glass of wine. The conversation began normally, as it usually did between them. They talked about the weather, the tasks Kenneth had been handling in the garden, and how quiet the house had been lately. But beneath the small talk, there was an undeniable tension in the air. Jasmine could feel it, could see it in the way Kenneth occasionally looked at her, as if he were waiting for something. She could feel her own heart racing, her mind teetering on the edge of something she wasn't sure she could control. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The air around them felt charged, thick with unspoken words, unacknowledged desires. Jasmine's heart raced as she took a slow step toward him, her body betraying her as she closed the distance between them. Before she could second-guess herself, she reached for him, pulling him closer. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, but it didn't take long for it to deepen, for the longing to take over. The kiss was everything she had been craving, passionate, real, full of heat and emotion. She felt alive again, something she hadn't felt in months, maybe even years. Her body responded in ways it never had with Paul. The way Kenneth kissed her, touched her, was different. He didn't hold back, and neither did she. The connection between them felt electric, a spark that neither of them could deny. When Paul returned from his trip, Jasmine tried to act like everything was fine. She greeted him with a smile, accepted his gifts, and went through the motions of being the wife he expected. But inside, her heart was heavy, weighed down by the guilt she couldn't escape. Every time she looked at him, the love he gave her felt distant, like a reminder of the lie she was living. Jasmine had promised herself that she would focus on her marriage, that she would do everything to make it work. But how could she ignore what she had with Kenneth? She tried to avoid Kenneth at first, but it was impossible. Every time she saw him, the tension between them was so strong she could feel it in her bones. The brief glances they shared, the unspoken words, made her heart race. It was like they were trapped in this dangerous dance that neither of them could stop. Jasmine and Kenneth's secret affair continued in the shadows, hidden from Paul, hidden from the world. Every time Paul left for another business trip, Jasmine felt a rush of excitement. She would meet Kenneth in secret, and the moments they shared were full of passion and desire. But the guilt never went away. Paul started to notice the changes in Jasmine. At first, it was small things. She was quieter than usual, lost in thought more often. She didn't laugh as much, and she seemed distracted, like her mind was elsewhere. He began to wonder what was wrong, but Jasmine did her best to cover it up. She smiled more, acted like everything was fine, but the distance between them grew. One evening, as they sat in their living room, Paul looked at Jasmine closely, sensing that something was off. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Jasmine nodded quickly, trying to push away the guilt that threatened to overwhelm her. "Of course, everything's fine. Just tired, that's all," she said, forcing a smile. But Paul wasn't convinced. He could see the change in her, and it troubled him. Something wasn't right. He had always trusted Jasmine, but the way she was acting now made him suspicious. He decided not to confront her directly yet. He wanted to be sure before making any accusations. In secret, Paul hired a private investigator. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and he needed answers. The investigator followed Jasmine's every move, watching her closely whenever she was alone or when Paul was away. Meanwhile, Kenneth began to sense that Jasmine was pulling away. He knew that she was feeling the weight of the affair, the guilt that was growing inside her. But instead of backing off, he used her guilt to his advantage. He knew how much she wanted to end things, to walk away from their secret, but he didn't want that. One day, he showed up at Jasmine's room unannounced. "I think it's time we talked," Kenneth said, his voice cold and serious. Jasmine froze. She had a bad feeling about this. "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart racing. Kenneth pulled out his phone and showed her photos. They were intimate, taken during their encounters. Jasmine's stomach turned as she realized what he was holding over her. "You didn't think I'd let you walk away without consequences, did you?" he asked, a sly smile on his face. "I think we need to make a deal." Jasmine's blood ran cold. She had hoped this wouldn't happen, that Kenneth would back off and let her go. But now she knew he wasn't going to. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Money," Kenneth said simply. "In exchange for keeping these photos and videos between us. I don't think Paul would appreciate seeing them, do you?" Jasmine felt trapped. She couldn't let Paul find out. The guilt she already felt was unbearable, and now Kenneth was threatening to expose everything. She tried to refuse, tried to tell him that she wanted to end things, but Kenneth wasn't interested in what she wanted. He was using her, and she had no choice but to give in. Reluctantly, Jasmine agreed to pay him off. Every time he showed up with new demands, Jasmine would give him the money he asked for. The payments drained her, both emotionally and financially, but she couldn't see a way out. One evening, as Jasmine was sitting at a restaurant, she received a call from Paul. His voice was calm, but there was something sharp beneath it. "I need you to come home," he said simply. "We need to talk." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She knew. She didn't need to be told. She knew that Paul had found out. He had hired the investigator, and now the truth was on the verge of being exposed. When she arrived home, Paul was waiting for her in the living room. His expression was cold, his eyes narrowed with anger. On the coffee table in front of him were a few printed photos, the same photos Kenneth had been using to blackmail her. The ones that showed her with him, in moments she had hoped would remain a secret forever. "Jasmine," Paul began, his voice steady but filled with hurt. "What is this? What's been going on?" The world seemed to collapse around her as she looked at him. She had never felt so small, so exposed. The guilt that had been eating at her now came crashing down, and she felt the weight of everything she had done, everything she had hidden, fall on her shoulders. "I'm so sorry," Jasmine whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you." Paul stood up slowly, his face filled with disbelief. "Then why? Why did you do this? Why did you lie to me?" Tears welled up in Jasmine's eyes, but she knew there was no hiding from the truth anymore. "I craved something I couldn't find with you," she said, her voice shaking. "You're kind, and you give me everything I could want. But there was always something missing. I needed more than just gifts and affection. I needed passion. I needed intimacy, and I thought I could find it with Kenneth." Paul's face twisted with hurt and fury. He took a step back, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "So, this is why you've been so distant, why you've been so cold with me." His voice cracked with emotion. "All this time, I thought we were building something together, something real. But now I find out it was all a lie." Jasmine's heart shattered as she saw the devastation in his eyes. She wanted to apologize again, to explain herself, but the words didn't come. She knew nothing could fix the damage she had done. But the worst was yet to come. Paul's face darkened as he picked up the photos from the table, holding them out in front of him. "What's this? What are these pictures?" Jasmine's stomach turned. The weight of the secret she had been keeping came crashing down. "Kenneth, he's been blackmailing me," she admitted in a whisper. "He has pictures of us, and he's been demanding money in exchange for silence. I couldn't let it come out, Paul. I couldn't let you find out." Paul stared at her, stunned into silence. His face hardened as the truth sank in. So, not only did you betray me, but now I find out you've been paying him off. The silence between them stretched on for what felt like hours. Finally, Paul spoke, his voice low and full of pain. I don't know if I can look at you the same way anymore. Jasmine sat in the cold, empty living room, staring at the papers in front of her. The words were blurry, but she knew what they said. Paul had filed for divorce. It was no surprise. How could he stay with her after everything? The weight of her actions, the lies, and the betrayal felt unbearable. Their marriage had been built on a lie, and now, Jasmine was paying the price. The emotional toll hit her harder than she had expected. She thought she could handle it, that she could somehow survive the guilt and shame, but now, seeing the divorce papers in front of her, she realized how much she had truly lost. Paul had once been the love of her life, or so she had convinced herself. His kindness, his generosity, the way he had always taken care of her, it had been enough, at least she had thought it was. But the affair with Kenneth had shown her how much more she had needed, how much she had craved passion, intimacy, and connection. And now, it had cost her everything. But the situation didn't end there. The damage she had caused had spread beyond their marriage. Paul, in his fury, had gone to extremes to get justice. After Jasmine's confession about Kenneth blackmailing her, he had taken matters into his own hands. Furious and disgusted by Kenneth's manipulation, he had pressed charges against him. Kenneth's arrest was a public one. Word spread quickly, and soon, Jasmine's world, which had once been filled with luxury and gifts, felt like a prison. The weight of her actions was suffocating. Her marriage had ended in disgrace, and now, her reputation was in tatters. She felt like she had lost everything: her husband, her dignity, and her sense of self-worth. When she returned home, the house felt emptier than ever. It was the same house, the same rooms, but it was no longer hers. The grand staircase, the elegant furniture, the opulent decor, all of it felt cold, distant. It was a reminder of a life she had taken for granted. A life that had been filled with wealth and comfort, but also with lies and secrets. Jasmine sat alone in the empty house, the once glamorous surroundings now feeling hollow and distant. The mansion, with its grand chandeliers, luxurious furniture, and sweeping views, was a silent reminder of everything she had lost. It felt like she had lived someone else's life, a life built on appearances and secrets, and now that life had come crashing down around her. The media had picked up on the story quickly. Scandalous headlines appeared everywhere. Wife of business tycoon involved in affair and blackmail. For the first time in her life, Jasmine felt truly alone. She no longer had Paul's love or support. The lavish vacations, the expensive dinners, the trips to designer stores, those things now felt like distant memories. Her world had been stripped of everything she had once thought was important. The financial security, the luxury, the admiration, all of it seemed so insignificant now. Yet, despite the overwhelming guilt, Jasmine knew she couldn't keep living like this. She had lost everything, but she still had one thing left: herself. She had to rebuild her life, but this time, it would be on her own terms. No more hiding behind the luxury and false security of her former life. It was time to rebuild from the ground up. The first step was admitting the truth. She had to face her actions, not just to Paul, but to herself. The affair, the lies, the blackmail, she had let it all spiral out of control, but now it was time to take responsibility. She had betrayed Paul's trust, but more than that, she had betrayed her own sense of worth. She had allowed herself to believe that material wealth and outward appearances were enough. But she had been wrong. Jasmine started to look at her situation differently. For the first time, she realized that what she had been missing wasn't the luxury she had taken for granted, but the strength within herself. She had allowed herself to get lost in her desires, her guilt, her fear of losing everything. But now, she had to find a way to move forward. She couldn't change the past, but she could shape her future. She wasn't sure what her future would look like yet. There was still so much to rebuild: her reputation, her sense of self, her emotional scars. But Jasmine knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let herself stay broken. The road ahead would be hard, but it was hers to walk. She would no longer rely on Paul's wealth or the security of her old life. She would create something new, something stronger. She didn't need the luxury or the gifts anymore. What she needed was honesty, growth, and, most importantly, forgiveness. It was going to take time, but Jasmine was ready. She would rise from the ashes of her past, stronger than she had ever been before. Jasmine's world had shattered, but she was determined to rebuild it, piece by piece. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please like, share, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe, also turn on post notifications so you will be notified anytime we upload a new story.